Alright guys, welcome back to the channel. This is the movie film critic, and I'd like to just say thank you to my first subscriber, Bara, from somewhere in Europe. Thank you for subscribing and liking my videos. And here on this channel we review movies. So the next movie review I'm going to do is one of the most studied movies of all time. It's called Citizen Kane. And this movie was shot in, I think, 1948. So this movie sort of broke ground on some of the modern ways that we shoot films. So I believe that it had to do with the staging and the depth of the shoot. So like the way they positioned actors in the foreground and then subjects in the middle ground and then subjects in the background, and maintaining a sharpness through all three of those parts of the filmmaking plane. So you pay attention to that if you watch this movie Citizen Kane, but I'd like to just talk about some of the story and the plot. So the movie begins as sort of like a newsletter type, startup of a man named Kane, and it talks about how he has this wonderful home full of these extravagant things, animals, and objects of the most luxurious type. And then it cuts to a scene where he's dying on his deathbed. And his last words are Rosebud. And so the movie begins like, what did he mean? What did he mean by Rosebud? The man Kane has died. He's died. He was beloved. What does he mean by Rosebud? And so that's the whole plot, is the people who live after him trying to discover what that man meant when he said Rosebud on his deathbed. And so then it does a flashback as someone is kind of digging into the details, trying to figure out what that means, Rosebud. And it starts off showing a flashback of Kane as a young boy, playing with his little sled at the orphanage, and a man comes to visit and tells his mother or his orphan caretaker that he's going to go away now and be raised in an affluent sort of, caretaking setup. And so the last moment you see him is he's taken away. He leaves his sled behind, and then the next scene happens where he's in the office about age 25, about to collect an inheritance that he's come into. That's why the reason they've taken him away, to raise him, to prepare for that. So he begins off with his career as a newspaper person. He decides that he's going to use his wealth to write headlines and take over the newspaper industry by creating, gossip-like headlines. So he does that. It becomes pretty successful, and he pours his heart into it. He really loves it. He really cares about it a lot. And once that becomes successful, he sort of abandons it, and he goes off to travel the world, and he leaves it behind. And it runs fine just without him. He comes back to check in on it and, collect the prizes. But most of the time he continues throughout his life, and then he gets into politics, and the movie tells the story of his life. Through the eyes of the people who knew him, and the people who are trying to figure out what he meant on his deathbed, when he mentioned those words Rosebud, the gentleman who's trying to figure that out, right, to write the report, because people are wondering. So he talks to all the people who know him best, and each person who knows him tells a little bit more of the story of who Kane was. And it's kind of interesting. Each person kind of has their own kind of idea of who he was or what he meant to them. Some people didn't like him much, and some people really did. And as it goes on, you figure out more and more about him. But what does it actually mean at the end, Rosebud? And well, just stop watching now if you don't want to. If you don't want to know how it ends, or you don't want me to spoil the movie, but after it's all said and done, you find out that Rosebud, when they're burning and throwing away all of his stuff after his passing from the mansion where he collected all these things, is that Rosebud was just the lettering on his sled. And so the message was, the sled he left behind when he was taken away as a boy was the one last thing he couldn't find out of all of his things he collected. That's the only thing that was on his mind. So what does that mean? And I guess it means that he spent his life collecting all these things, but really what he wanted most was the one thing that really had no real world value at all, except what it meant to him at that moment, that he was taken away from his childhood. And so it's really crazy to find that out if you haven't seen the movie, because it really is a mystery, and you kind of see how the man lives and how he changes over time, and how he kind of becomes grumpy and angered, with everybody, bending to his whim and his will, and eventually the world stops, listening to him, and his woman leaves, and the only people are there, his maids, his 100 maids or whatever. And so it's an interesting message. I guess if you haven't seen it, I would recommend it. And I enjoyed it. And for a movie that was filmed in 1948, it really felt like something modern. The way they positioned the scenes, the way they kind of told the story in like a non-chronological order. I think it was pretty good. The acting was phenomenal. The actor, Orson Welles, I think he was the actor, the director, but it was a good movie. I recommend it. And if you like my review on Citizen Kane, this full kind of synopsis or diagnosis, then subscribe and comment your favorite scene in the movie or your favorite quote. And look forward to my next reviews. This is sort of the first one that I'm doing that's more in depth. So stay tuned for the next one, and I'll see you guys on the next one. This is the Movie Film Critic, and I'll catch y'all later. Thanks for watching.